Bear with me 1 second. Just bear with me a second. Okay, hopefully everyone can see me. So I'm gonna give people a few minutes to tune in before I get started. For those of you who do not know, um, we have a book club called New Possibilities Book Club. We meet on the last Sunday of each month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time via Zoom. And we also meet in person. For those people who live in the Baltimore, Maryland area, we meet at the Baltimore County Public Library located in Towson, Maryland. And we usually meet on the bottom level, either in the Wilson room or the Towson room. This meeting for January will be in the Towson room. So again, that's the last Sunday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will post a link to the book club invite, and I encourage you all to come out and support that. So for this video, I want to talk about this horrific tragedy that happened in New Orleans over New Year's Eve. While people were gathering on Bourbon Street to celebrate the New Year, they were gathering, expecting to have a joyous occasion, a joyful occasion and all that kind of stuff. Instead, it turned into a night of horror. You had this terrorist drive a rental vehicle through a crowd of people. At least 15 people were killed, many others were injured. This attacker also fired upon police, and he probably fired upon some of the innocent civilians as well, but he fired upon police. He got into a shootout with the police. The police shot and killed the attacker. And I just want to talk about this. First of all, here's some basic information that we know about the attacker. His name was Shamsud Dean Jabbar. He was 42 years old. He's a U.S. citizen. He was a former member of the Army. He served in the Army. Uh, this is a man who started off with his own company. He had like a real estate investment company. The company ended up being a failure. He ended up owing like $28,000. His company was in debt by $28,000. This man had failed marriages. He had been divorced twice, and he had racked up a substantial debt. And he ended up having to incur loans in order to pay for his attorneys. And according to statements that he made in a video while inside of a vehicle, according to news reports, it was dark in the vehicle. You really couldn't see his face. And while he was recording, he basically said a couple of things. And before I get to that, I just want to shout out everybody that's tuning in. Peace and blessings, everyone. Um, I'll be responding to your comments in a second. But this is a man who was going through a lot of trouble. So in a video, he basically said that at one point, he was planning on gathering family members for a celebration. And he was planning on using that as an opportunity to actually murder his own family members. And then he later decided that he changed his mind, and he decided that he would join ISIS. That's a terrorist organization based in Iran. Based in Iraq, not Iran, Iraq and Syria. So he decided that he would join ISIS and support the cause of ISIS. When the police gained control of the vehicle after they, took him out, They uncovered a ISIS flag in a vehicle. They said that there was explosives that were contained in a cooler. And they actually said that there were devices placed, explosive devices placed in various areas in New Orleans around the scene of this particular crime. So there's been this is a crazy situation. And as I was, reflecting on this whole situation, quite a few questions came to mind. Okay, so somebody said they want to know what happened. Let's see. So I don't know if this person is completely unfamiliar with the story, but just to recap real briefly, you had this situation where this African American man by the name of Shamsud Dean Jabbar, who was 42 years old, a U.S. citizen from Texas, uh, participated in a terrorist attack against people in New Orleans. He drove his rental vehicle into a crowd of people, killing 15 people. He engaged in a shootout with authorities. The police shot and killed him, and now they're exploring whether or not he had any direct connection with ISIS. There was a flag found in his car, an ISIS flag found in his car. There are video recordings of him, talking about how he was inspired by ISIS, and etc. And I mentioned some of the personal problems that he was going through. For those of you who missed it, he had a business that went under. It was in debt. He owed like $28,000. He had two failed marriages. He ended up getting further in debt to pay for attorneys and stuff like that. So he went through a lot of personal issues before deciding to join ISIS. And so, here we are with another tragedy where many innocent people have died. And here we have a situation where this person purportedly claimed to be acting in the name of a religion. He claims that he was, in support of ISIS, and that's what motivated him to do what he did, to wage this war against the American people. And as I mentioned before, this man initially was planning to kill members of his family, but instead of doing that, he decided that he would go on this terrorist rampage and join ISIS. And so for me, this is not a situation where somebody, it appears to be the case. It appears that this is not a situation where we have a person who was genuinely motivated by some kind of religious extremism or something like that. This seems like a situation where you have a man with a lot of problems, a lot of anger and frustration, deciding that what he was going to do is lash out at society in general, and then cloak his actions in the garb of some kind of religious cause or some kind of righteous cause, when really it's just a man acting out, really it's just a man uh, expressing violence towards innocent people out of frustration, not out of any kind of genuine appeal to any particular cause. And, as I reflect on this issue and this horrible incident, several questions came to mind. And what I want to do is just talk about some of those questions. The first question that I have is, how can any person of faith commit something as horrible as this? How could somebody that actually believes in a just and merciful God commit this kind of horrible tragedy against innocent people? And another question that comes to mind, and I ask this question as a Muslim, like why is it? Why is it that too often when these terrorist attacks occur, it's a Muslim that is participating in these acts of terrorism? I simply can't understand that, because, Islam condemns, these types of actions. Most Muslims in the Muslim world condemn this type of irrational, senseless violence. But too often, there are Muslims that participate in these types of horrific acts. And my question is why? Why is that the case? The other thing that I thought about immediately when I heard about this whole situation, and then when I found out that he's actually a military, he was a former military person, he served in the army and all that kind of stuff. When I saw that, I immediately wondered, like, why is it that in several of these acts of terrorism that have taken place, many of the people that organize these terrorist attacks and participate in these types of terrorist attacks, too often they are former military personnel. In this situation, this man served in the army. You had the situation in D.C. years ago with involving the D.C. sniper, where you had a black man who was a former military person actually carrying out terrorist attacks against innocent civilians, just walking about, living their lives, shooting. I remember it was like a terrifying time because at that particular time, I lived in the DC area. So people were randomly being shot by this DC sniper who was a former military person and was also someone who purported to be Muslim. So it was just a terrifying situation, but it's like, why is it that military people are often the people participating in these types of acts? And then when you look at, the situation involving the terrorist attack at Fort Hood, that person was a member of the military. It was an Arab man who was a member of the military and also a Muslim. So it's like, why is it that too often these terrorist attacks are orchestrated by people who were or are military members? And the other thing that comes to mind with that is, like, the first thing I think about when I hear about military people involved in these types of actions, I immediately think about the Manchurian Candidate. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with that movie. There were two versions of the film, the original and one that Denzel Washington played in. And basically it was about how, the government used mind control over certain military personnel where they could, trigger certain reactions or certain responses with certain cues or certain triggers and stuff like that to make sure that they carry out certain acts unconsciously, like where they're not aware of what they're doing. And I know that people heard of MK Ultra and all that kind of stuff, but those are the kind of things that I immediately think about when I see that it's a military person involved in these terrorist attacks. In the back of my mind, I wonder about, the scenario laid out in films like, The Manchurian Candidate. And I don't want to feed into any conspiracy theories or not anything like that, but, it's a lot of suspicion around this whole incident. And at this point, there's no proof of any such conspiracy, but it's something that just comes to mind as soon as I hear about these acts of terrorism committed by former military personnel. And the other thing that I think about is, like, what kind of impact will this action have on American foreign policy? So I wonder, like, will this trigger any kind of military action, further military action in the Middle East, especially in light of what's going on in Gaza? You have the ongoing genocide in Gaza. You have, the situation where Israel has, attacked Syria and Lebanon. And I'm just wondering if this will be used as an excuse to justify further military intervention in the Middle East. And I also wonder about the impact that this will have on African American Muslims. The fact that you have this African American Muslim who participated in this act of terrorism against innocent people. This was an indiscriminate attack on innocent people just simply trying to celebrate the new year. There were people, I looked at an article, about the victims of this tragedy. And there were people of many, black people, white people, old people, young people. This was a clearly indiscriminate act. And it was committed again by an African American Muslim. And I'm just wondering if this will create some kind of backlash against Muslims such as myself. Like, will it create a backlash against us and against our community? We know that when, a lot of times people, instead of looking at something as an individual act, they look at it as a collective act. They look at it as an act done by all Muslims, and they think that all Muslims think a certain way. And so they may target Muslims for, hate crimes. They may target Muslim Americans, for further government surveillance and suppression. So I just wonder about the very real impact that this will have on the African American Muslim community. The other thing that I'll raise is this. Despite the fact that this person who committed this horrible act of terrorism was an American citizen, have Donald Trump trying to politicize it and make it into an immigrant type of issue. He basically suggested that the person that was responsible for this horrible terrorist act was, an immigrant, when it's been proven otherwise. It's been proven that he was an American citizen from Texas, but yet and still Donald Trump is using this to fan the flames of hatred against immigrants. So I just wonder what you all think about this whole situation. I'm really curious, and I want to thank you all for tuning in. And I want to encourage you all again to like, comment, subscribe, share your thoughts, share this video. I'm really interested in hearing your perspective on this particular issue. And I want to remind you, for those of you who like to read great books and engage in great discussions with great people, I want to encourage you to like our Facebook book club page, and that's New Possibilities Book Club. I will post a link to the invite in the comments to this live stream. I hope that you all can check it out. Join the book club, like the book club, and check out our meetings. The next book that we will be discussing is Things Fall Apart. That's a masterpiece. It's a book that I read, some time ago, like back when I was in college. And I'm really looking forward to that discussion. In November, we discussed Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, The Message. And that was a powerful discussion. We had a great turnout. And I hope that we also have the same for this upcoming book that we're going to discuss this month, Things Fall Apart. So again, I want to encourage you all to like the book club page and to join our meeting. And we meet again virtually and in person. So we'll be meeting via Zoom and in person at the Baltimore County Public Library in Towson, Maryland at, I think it's 320 York Road in Towson, Maryland. So I hope to see y'all there. Again, I look forward to hearing your comments. And this whole situation is just horrible. We have to condemn these acts of terrorism. There's no justification whatsoever for anyone to take the lives of innocent civilians. No decent person can support that kind of activity. No cause justifies that kind of activity. You can't condemn what's going on in Gaza and then participate in genocidal actions against innocent people. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Tell me what you think. Peace and blessings. Have a great evening.